do you believe the healthcare system is built to keep people sick, or is that just a conspiracy?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends from which perspective you're looking. If you're looking at this from an industry perspective, so pharmaceutical industry, the answer is yes.
You said mammograms can be putting women at risk. Why do most women have no idea about this?
Because they are listening to what they're told by the doctors and by mainstream medicine. And still, mammography is the gold standard. For every 2,000 women screened, one life would be saved. But 10 women are overtreated for cancers that would never have been a threat.
What are the most dangerous health myths that you see people still believing today, even in 2025?
Honestly, it's back to that doing your own research, because there are still people who just follow blindly what their doctors and what mainstream medicine tell them.
So today's guest is Dr. Nyjon Eccles, MD, PhD, and one of the UK's most accomplished doctors in natural and preventative medicine. He's here to challenge what we think we know about health and offer real solutions that work. Nyjon, lovely to have you on the show.
Anas, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolute great. First of all, I would love the audience to know a bit more about you and a bit more of your wonderful background. If you could enlighten them and really tell us who Dr. Nyjon Eccles is and what you currently do.
All right, so I'll try and make this long story short. Okay, so it first started with, really, as I recall, my teenage interest, really, which is, I had this interest in natural medicine, in nutritional medicine, dietary, lifestyle medicine. These are broad terms, but I remember even as a teenager, I used to do a lot of reading on this stuff, and I think that was the catalyst to me becoming interested in medicine generally. Yes. So, but as things evolved, I ended up actually studying science. I did a degree in pharmacology first as an allied topic to medicine. But it gave me a very broad background in how drugs work, how they produce their side effects, etc. And then, I kept running with the pharmacology, then ended up doing a PhD in pharmacology at one of the London, at Charing Cross Hospital, actually, which was, so this was a very clinical project. It was migraine research, but it put my foot in the door of clinical medicine whilst, still being on the science platform for my PhD. And actually, from there, I realized that if I was ever going to really make any impact in clinical medicine, I needed to be an MD, not just PhD. So I ended up going from PhD straight into medical school. It's like going back to school again. And that whole process from BSc, PhD, MD took me 14 years. But, looking back on it, what it did was gave me a very strong both science and medical platform from which to do the things that I now do, because post medicine, I didn't lose that interest in nutritional lifestyle, natural medicine that I had as a teenager. The challenge for me was, how do I navigate to be doing that with the qualifications that I had? And actually, long story short, is that I had to really find my own way, because back then, and we're talking about the late 90s, there was no functional medicine that existed back then. The Institute of Functional Medicine now and others, have evolved subsequently. So it didn't exist. I had to find my own way. The biggest thing that I did to catapult me into that field was I went to the Czech Republic and studied with a doctor who was medical doctor come naturopath. I basically sat with him in his clinics for a couple of months, learning one-on-one what he was doing. That was a scales falling from the eyes experience, really, because he was a medic who was treating naturopathically, achieving amazing results across a broad range of different disease process. And really, this was my launch into this field back in 1998. I went and studied with him, came back, set up what my clinic, which has now become the Natural Doctor. And of course, since that time, I've moved into different areas, which we'll talk about a bit. That's how it all came to be, and, if anything, the studying pharmacology and the studying medicine did not deter me from wanting to be more impactful in the way that I practiced and the way that I treated patients. If anything, it just gave me, it showed me a route map of which way to go and which way not to go, if I can put it that way.
Yes, and I know that you're very invested in the work that you do as a doctor, and you're always trying to improve over the many years that we've known each other as well. So, and you've made leaps and bounds. One question about what you just said about Czech Republic: do you think the Eastern European countries are more advanced medically and less controlled potentially by big pharma? I don't want to open up conspiracy theories or anything like that, but do you
Mm.
think they're ahead of us?
I don't know that the answer to that is yes. I think there's still a lot of constrainment, definitely, because this colleague who I went to train with, I still actually do joint clinics with him. We're still working together, so I hear firsthand. And actually, they have some of the same restrictions and restraints that we have here in the West. So I want to say that they have a lot more spa medicine going on, probably, but I still think by and large, there's a strong influence of pharmaceutical mainstream medicine. Yeah. I think they have similar challenges to us in the
I
West.
see. I see. And do you believe the healthcare system is built to keep people sick, or is that just a conspiracy?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends from which perspective you're looking.
I'll tell you exactly, actually, just to give you a little bit more guidance.
Yeah.
There are options to treat certain conditions in different ways, which have been proven to work in other countries with a little bit more freedom and a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more open restrictions and
Mm-hmm.
non-rigid regulation. But over here, or anywhere, as a matter of fact, where they have these strong regulations, they don't allow it, even though it will be beneficial and save more lives. One way to look at it is the cost of tests being done. I was speaking to my GP and he said, well, there is a test we can do for prostate cancer, which will predict that somebody will get prostate cancer before they get it, which means we could treat it better. But because it costs so much
Mm.
and they go on a mass basis, they don't do that test. They
No.
leave it when after people get it, because most of the time the survival rate is quite high, and they will treat it with prolonging it as long as possible. So that's one way of looking at it, and the other way is any other treatment based on your experience.
Yeah, so the reason I sort of answered your question with a question was because if you're looking at this from an industry perspective, so pharmaceutical industry, the answer is yes, there's a vested interest in people remaining on the gravy train, meaning that we're not interested in cures, but we're interested in continually supplying you with medicines that you'll need to take for the rest of your life. So, and I think, unfortunately, let's be brutal about this. The pharmaceutical industry has become distorted from what it might have originally been to being much more focused on economics rather than on what are the best treatments. So, if that's why I asked the question. So, from a pharma industry perspective, yes, there's no interest in cure. There's more interested in continuing to continued access to drugs rather than cure. I think what you just said about early detection as well and treating early is a problem with medicine generally. I mean, all of my medical training was about treating disease once it occurs. When a sick person presents, you treat. But this is where functional medicine is very different. What that's based on is detecting the risk of an illness much earlier and doing something about that risk so that the disease never develops in the first case. So identifying markers of a disease risk much further upstream, and then intervening sooner with lifestyle, nutritional, nutraceutical changes to arrest that whatever process is going on so that that person does not become a victim of a disease later down the line. And of course, that's one of the things we'll talk about with breast health. I think applying that functional medicine model to how we deal with protecting women's breast health is a good example of this.
Yes, indeed. And, coming to mammograms, I mean, we've had discussions and you've said mammograms can be putting women at risk.
Mm.
Why do most women have no idea about this?
It's because they are listening to what they're told by the doctors and by mainstream medicine. And still mammography is the gold standard for breast cancer screening, despite the fact that for quite a few years now, and I'm talking, 2013, 14, big studies were published which showed that mammography did more harm than good, meaning that for every 2,000 women screened, one life would be saved. This is with mammography screening. One life is saved for every 2,000 women screened, but 10 women are overtreated for cancers that would never have been a threat to their life. And that's what the science shows. So in actual fact, all mammography is doing is leading us to overtreat women for cancers which would not have been a threat to them. So those cancers being detected by those mammograms are either pre-cancers or not even cancers at all. But these women are still having chemotherapy, mastectomy, radiation for those cancers that would not have evolved. So when we drill down on the mammography data, that's what it's showing is the risks outweigh the benefits. And the other element to this, and now so mainstream is still selling mammograms as gold standard, safe and effective. Okay, but actually the science doesn't actually back that up, and big studies don't back that up. Now it's a topic that's being debated, but if you listen to, it's not just me saying it, if you listen to some of the reasoned experts that have considered all the data, it's what I just said. The outcome is that we're doing more harm than good. Now, if we had a drug that was doing more harm than good, that drug should be taken off the market. And the reality is that mammography is doing more harm than good, and yet we're persisting with using it as a screening method. And the other thing I want to add to that, because there's another dimension to this. Mammography is sold as early detection, but it is not early detection, and I'll explain why. By the time you can see a tumor on a breast in a mammogram, it has to be of the size of a small grape, usually, let's say 1 centimeter in size. Now, to reach that size, it's about 500 million cancer cells. And that has been developing, taking average tumor replication rates. That's been developing 6 to 10 years. Worse than that, wide excision biopsy studies where they take a 4 centimeter margin around what was thought to be a single tumor on a mammogram show, get this, Anas, in 2/3 of cases, you find microfocal deposits of cancer in the surrounding tissue in what was thought to be a single tumor on a mammogram. So all these things considered, mammography can't be early detection because we're almost detecting it 6 to 10 years too late. And of course, the later you detect a cancer, the more difficult it is to get a person into remission from it. So all these things considered, one, it's not proven, it does more harm than good based on all the data. And two, it's not really early enough detection. If we're going to change the women's breast cancer risk, we have to have a tool which picks up earlier signs of a breast in trouble, and we have to be able to do something to reduce the risks. Here, this is functional medicine in application. Reduce those risks so that that woman never develops a tumor 5-10 years down the line. So I think that's where we have to be. I think that's how we change things. I don't think mammography is, well, the data shows it is not the right tool. It's not saving lives. It's not saving breasts. It's leading to overtreatment.
Why is it still pushed so hard? If this is still the gold standard, why haven't people challenged this? Or if they have challenged this, why hasn't anybody listened? This is where the conspiracy side of it comes in. We're thinking, well, we know there's a problem. If you look at it like a business, if there's a problem in the business, we're losing money over here. The first thing we're going to do is change that and try to rectify it and put something that actually works within its place. If they're not doing that in the medical field, then the first question that comes to my mind is there must be something wrong. There must be somewhere along the lines, people have got some interests and they're protecting those interests. And again, I might be going down a tangent, but this is the first thing, because nobody would leave, if you have a bleeding lung, you try to patch it up, right? Metaphorically speaking.
Yes.
So why isn't this being done here?
Yeah. I mean, look, there is definitely vested interests behind this, protecting mammography. Mammography is big business. If you think we're in the UK, we invite women from 50 years to come for a screening mammogram every 3 years. It's big business. And unfortunately, I think a lot of medicine has become more about business than what really changes things, And I think especially in the UK, I have to tell you, I think medicine can get stuck in the mud. It's not just UK, but I think attitudes are slow to change. And if you come up with something new, something challenging, that new idea takes a long time before it gets embraced. Anything new in medicine usually is considered something rogue to begin with, of no value until it becomes valuable. When X-rays were first came into medicine, people thought it was a hoax. They thought the whole notion of X-rays was a hoax until it was obvious it wasn't. So attitudes slow to change. Some countries are worse than others. There's definitely vested interests involved. And if you see some of the arguments against those that challenge mammography, clearly there are some vested interests. But the problem is the victims in all of this are women. If we're talking about mammography, they're the victims. They're not being told, what the limitations of mammography are. We just, recently, just to illustrate this, we had a celebrity come through our clinic and did post it on their social media about she'd been for a thermogram, and if you saw the comments that flowed from that, mammographers were posting, etc., saying, and what was absolutely clear to me is how people are so stuck in what they believe. It's dogma. And I think there is a lot of dogma in medicine. We get so stuck in our ideas that we can't think outside of them. That's very dangerous, that we can't be flexible in our thinking. And I think you've seen that a lot more recently, is people are so dogmatic in their beliefs that they can't think of it. They can't listen to any other argument outside of it. And I saw that a lot in the posts that were coming out on, and we were presenting logical arguments. I'd say everything I've just told you about mammography being late detection, what the data is showing, why other scanning modalities have more merit and why they should be considered. And it was like we were talking to a wall. It's like,
What sort of comments were people saying?
for example, that mammography is the gold standard. Encourage ladies, don't listen to this. Go and have your mammograms. Right now, this was coming from like mammographers or doctors, and they were accusing us of being dangerous because of what we were presenting. But actually, I would say they are more dangerous because what they're doing is directing women towards a screening modality that does more harm than good. And why are they doing that? It's because they're not up to date with what the studies show. And why aren't they up to date? Well, because they don't do their own research, basically. I think in medicine, and it applies to other things as well, people listen too much to what they're told and don't do their own research. And that's a big problem across a lot of areas, is if you don't do your own research and you don't dig and you just listen to what the authorities are telling you, you're going to be in trouble in terms of knowing where is the truth in this. You've got to do your own research.
Yeah, you do really have to read in between the lines and
Yeah,
take everything with a pinch of salt, isn't it?
you
Because
do.
there are companies and corporations out there that do have vested interest in these things.
Mm.
And that's probably one of the motivations of why you started ThermoCheck,
Yeah,
to be a solution. I mean, not an official solution. I mean, we're not making any medical claims on
no,
this podcast. However, do tell us about ThermoCheck and the benefits of it and how it differs from mammograms for people that are non-technical who don't have that background.
sure. So ThermoCheck is basically, it's a breast thermography imaging system. Okay. And it's been a while. Breast thermography has been around for a while. There are big studies going back to the 1980s, and thermography has been around for a while. Nitrogen cooled cameras, now much more advanced digital infrared. The camera technology now, infrared sensors. Basically, you're detecting heat coming from the breast. So we've advanced a lot over the last 20 years or so. But the principle of this is that these thermal changes in the breasts can be harbingers of later risk. So whether you're looking at inflammatory change or infection in the breast, which can cause heat, or whether you're looking at a pre-cancer, because cancers are highly metabolic and generate heat, all those are possible. But what the studies show is that if a woman has an abnormal thermogram, meaning she has heat on one breast, not in the other, or abnormal blood vessels, that those, if they persist over time, the studies show that that woman has a 40% increased risk of a breast cancer after 5 years. Okay. Now, what does that mean? It means 60% don't develop a breast cancer. So what everybody missed about that data was that these thermal signals indicate greater risk. And even if they don't represent a cancer when you pick them up, they represent an increased risk over time. Yes. So the principle for me, the main point about thermography, and I'll tell you a bit about ThermoCheck in a minute, why it's different. The main principle of thermography is one, yes, can it detect early cancers? Yes, because these thermal signals can precede the structural changes that we're seeing on a mammogram. So these thermal signals occur before the structural changes. So can you detect an earlier breast cancer? Yes. And all the science shows there's about a 90% sensitivity and specificity, which means that, in other words, the accuracy, when it's done correctly, is about 90, even 95%. So I've been doing breast thermography since 2004. ThermoCheck was born in 2014. What ThermoCheck is an advanced breast thermography which brings together all of the defined protocols to do breast thermography correctly. Yeah, so from the way that the patient is prepared before they come for the scan, the way the scan is conducted, and the way you analyze those images, and we do it using computer algorithms, not the human eye, which is still being done, by the way, but we use computers to analyze the thermal data. And then the report is generated automatically. All the doctor has to do is sign off whether or not there are any abnormal blood vessel patterns. So ThermoCheck brings together the standardization of doing thermography correctly to get the highest sensitivity and specificity. And it allows the generation of a report in seconds. So it's not intrusive on a doctor's time. So when I developed ThermoCheck, I had several aims. One was to make this more available to women, because I think it's a game changer in terms of reducing risk of breast cancer. And number two, I wanted something that would not intrude on a doctor's time, because, when I used to do this and manually generate reports, it took me half an hour per client to generate a report. With ThermoCheck, it generates it in seconds. I can sign off looking at the clinical data, looking at the thermal data. Yes, a scan can be signed off in like 2 minutes. So it's a game changer in terms of the time a doctor needs to invest in reporting. That's one. And then it standardizes the protocols and the way that a thermogram is done, so that it's always that any one given client is always scanned in the same way. If they don't prepare properly, they're sent away and rescheduled. You have to standardize the way it's done to get the best sensitivity and specificity. So ThermoCheck is a standardized breast imaging apparatus, which was designed really for our own purpose for scanning, but also a model that could be rolled out to other doctors to offer this as a breast health module in their own clinical practice. So the second,
and you're rolling this out already,
yeah,
right?
yeah, we're already in 4 places: London, Oxford, Copenhagen, and southern Spain. Interest from Dubai, Turkey, Istanbul, Lisbon, a few other places. So the aim is really to place it mainly Europe first before we consider the US. But we've created this standardized apparatus for effective breast health screening, because we don't like to call it breast cancer screening. We like to call it breast health. It's a breast health model we're talking about, preservation of breast health.
Of course, and end to end, it also helps with the turnaround times as well, right? Because they could get a report at a click of a button at the moment with the algorithms that you have.
Yeah, it's very quick, and the training process is easy. You can train a technician to do scan in really a few hours. A doctor can be trained to sign off thermogram in a half a day, and we have the training platforms for doing that. The other part to that story, I must just add, Anas, because a lot of criticisms of thermography say, well, all you're doing is, if you're finding these thermal signals and then they go for a mammogram ultrasound shows there's nothing to see. You see, what do you do about that? If a woman has an abnormal thermogram, which we're saying means increased risk over time, but they have a mammogram, ultrasound, MRI is normal, so there's no structural change. See, what are you going to do? Are you going to just wait and see if that woman ends up having a structural change? Or are you going to intervene? So that was my challenge to me 10 years ago, and I investigated the nutritional profiles of these women that had abnormal thermograms. And I found that from my nutritional studies, they always had a deficiency in certain key nutrients. And for example, vitamin D, iodine, just to name a couple. And then what we did is I developed some nutraceuticals based on those studies. And what I found with using those in women with abnormal thermograms, I could return more than 80% of them to a normal thermogram in 6 months. So basically,
That is amazing.
there you have this. For me, that's why I wrote the book, changing the game in breast cancer risk, because ThermoCheck is a tool for early detection, but you also need to have a tool or tools to reverse those thermal changes, so that you're effectively taking that woman from a high risk to a low risk position and reducing her long-term risk of developing a breast cancer. So the complete story is that I think we already have the tools to be able to change breast cancer risk in women. It's using a tool like ThermoCheck in conjunction with a functional medicine therapeutic approach and that's what I've proven to work, to fix those early changes, these upstream changes, before they become, something more relevant or more significant downstream.
No, that's great. And you touched upon the books briefly.
Yeah,
You've written 4 books.
yeah.
What books were they?
This one, the changing the game in breast cancer risk, that was the first one. This was written both for doctors and for women, really, as an empowerment tool. It talks a lot about thermography, how it's done. It talks about ThermoCheck. It talks about lifestyle changes, nutritional factors that are involved in breast health. So that was written both as a tool for ThermoCheck doctors, but also to empower women how they can change their risk. And there's this one. This one is an allied one. It's a bit more detailed for doctors. It's a thermomammography, a new era in breast cancer prevention and detection. Just goes into a bit more scientific detail on some of the key elements of the other book. This one, I'm sure we'll end up talking about this a bit. This is to do with natural ways to prevent hair loss, and it talks a little bit about one of my other developments, BioGrow Hair. And then the last one that I've written more recently is this one. It's called Reclaiming Balance. This is to do with, it's really for women's health around management of menopause, management of period pain. What are some of the natural ways that menopause symptoms and period pain can be tackled without resorting to invasive methods? So using, natural, non-invasive solutions to the this was all stuff that I've written over years. It's just that over the last year, I've managed to find some time to pull a lot of that information together to to get the books out there again, to try and make a difference in some of these arenas.
No, definitely. And in terms of, hair loss, I mean, that
Yeah.
is a big problem nowadays,
Yes.
especially with people in their 20s. And you created BGH, which stands for BioGrow Hair,
Yes.
and it is safer to use than Propecia with faster results as well.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that, because I think that's an amazing product that you've built. And that's the first question. Well, the first question is, what made you move into the direction to create something like that, which in my opinion is a breakthrough? And on the other hand, why are so many people in their 20s losing their hair
Yes.
and moving on to middle-aged and the older
Yeah.
generations as well?
Yes, yes. Why did I develop it? I think that was your first question. It was because it was an interest. It was an interest of mine anyway. Hair loss was from way back when I was doing pharmacology. So, and then I started to read about the limitations of the existing pharmaceutical-based treatments. So, topical minoxidil, Propecia, you mentioned. When I started to dig, I realized that there were kind of emerging lawsuits, particularly around Propecia, of patients who were being harmed by even low-dose finasteride, which is, the drug Propecia is. And some of these side effects were irreversible, loss of libido, mental disturbances, etc., increased risk of prostate cancer. It's like, well, this is not clean. Even though it's low dose, it's not having a precise enough effect. So based on my own research, there are several mechanisms which contribute to hair loss: inflammation, oxidative stress, circulatory deficiency, dihydrotestosterone. All these mechanisms are play in, but you see, the drugs that are available really only focus on one. So Propecia it blocks dihydrotestosterone. It's one mechanism. Minoxidil is really thought to improve circulation. But BioGrow Hair targets 4 or 5 different mechanisms around hair loss at the same time. So it lowers inflammation, it lowers oxidative stress, it increases circulation, and it lowers the impact of dihydrotestosterone. So I think one of the reasons why we see such rapid effects, and usually you can see, visible hair regrowth within a couple of months, certainly within 3 months in the majority of cases. It doesn't work for everybody. It won't work if you've got complete hair loss, but if your hair is thinning, we've had really good results. And I think it's because we're targeting all of these mechanisms in one formula, which is uncommon to be doing that, in a pharmaceutical. So we see good results, and we see quite speedy results as well. And we have a formula for men and one for women. In women, we see women are not really offered much for hair loss. That's the other thing. A lot of the I mean, you can use topical minoxidil, but women's hair loss is not really, they're not really offered much. But we find we get really good results with BioGrow Hair for women in terms of, restoring hair growth, thickening hair. We have a lot of happy women customers who've used this formula. So it was another challenge for me. I saw that this wasn't being done well from mainstream, and I thought, okay, let's see if we can apply, some basic natural functional medicine principles, as if we can't come up with something better. And I'm pleased to say I think we have.
I think you have as well. And what is the catalyst for this? What are 3 everyday items that people are doing that is damaging their health and they have no idea about it?
Well, I think a lot of it is, look, with hair loss, there's some genetic components, okay? Let's say that right off the bat. There's some genetic components, but that's not the full story. A lot of it is lifestyle related, and some of it is nutritional deficiency, vitamin D, zinc, biotin, for example. Iron, these are common ones. You have to make sure you're not deficient in those. Vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency is extremely common, by the way, in my experience, much more common than people think. And the vast majority of people don't know what their blood level is. So that's common, but there are other nutrient deficiencies. And then if you have those and you layer on top of that, lifestyle, not getting enough sleep, stress, big factor, from multiple angles. Stress causes inflammation. If you get inflammation at the hair follicle, you're going to get more hair fall, oxidative stress. Not eating enough, not having a healthy enough diet, which has plenty of antioxidants, plenty of anti-inflammatory components in it. So the plant foods, fish elements, Mediterranean stuff. The more we veer from that, and the other side to this is the toxic environment that we're living in, and again, if you don't eat enough plant-based foods, which have these phytonutrients, which are natural detoxifiers in. We should probably add iodine as a trace mineral to that one as well, because 50% of Europeans are deficient in it. So if you're deficient in some of these natural elements which enable your body to detoxify, to reduce oxidative stress, to reduce inflammation, and on top of that you've got low vitamin D, low some key nutrients, then you're much more vulnerable to hair loss. Even if you don't have a genetic risk. Now, if you have a genetic risk on top of that, and you have all of those other elements, then you're on a bit of a losing wicket. So, I highlight some of these things in the books, some of these deficiencies that, check, make sure you're not deficient in these things. I think it's a combination of all of those things together.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a link to all of these books in the description where people can actually find them directly from the video. When the COVID, the big C, was spread and they were jabbing everyone, you were one of the first people to come out with a COVID protocol, which was to help reduce or eliminate uh, COVID as a whole. Now, excuse my framing of this. You could correct me in a second. And it was a mix of vitamin C, vitamin D, and you brought up publicly that hey, vitamin D deficiency is a huge risk if you are deficient in vitamin D, and this could be a matter of life and death. And to a certain extent, people ridiculed you, they went against what you said, and then 3 months later in the newspapers, it was all over the papers saying, "Hey, this is what we found." When it's not what they found, it was what you've been banging that drum, God knows how long.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on that? And you've pioneered in times of distress, in times of extreme pressure. I mean, how do you feel that? I want you to comment on your treatment around that time, and then B, when people realized, well, hold on a second, you're right. How was the people's perception and your way of dealing with things at that moment in time?
Well, not everyone was unreceptive. I mean, a lot of people were receptive to that messaging. It actually came that sort of documentation that I published around that time and put it out on our website. It was because I was approached by a surgeon colleague of mine who came to see me and said, "We're on the front line treating COVID, and we don't know how to protect ourselves. Can you not write something that will empower us to lower our risks of contracting COVID?" There's a lot of fear around that time, especially amongst some doctors. And I said, sure. I said, let me put something together. So that article that you're referring to was stemmed from this surgeon requesting help because of my functional medicine background. What can we do to protect ourselves? You know, it, one of the common things that is against all infectious diseases, you must have vitamin D is quite critical because one, it's anti-inflammatory. It stops this cytokine storm or reduces risk, I should say, more accurately, of cytokine storm, which was one of the things that was running people into trouble, who got COVID, is this cytokine storm that was happening. And those that were really getting ill from it, you got these inflammatory cascades happening, which was causing a problem. And there were natural ways to reduce, cytokine storm. Vitamin D is one of them. Vitamin C is another one. Um, and there were early studies coming out, by the way, which were showing categorically that people who did well with COVID and recovered quickly or were asymptomatic had at least had normal vitamin D levels. The ones that were running into trouble were the ones that had insufficient or low vitamin D. They're the ones that were ending up in intensive care and not surviving. So that information was coming out fairly quickly, and although a lot of it was observational, it just matched what we knew from previous studies anyway. So is there any harm to taking vitamin D? No, and especially not if you take it with vitamin K2. And there was a lot of misinformation around that, saying, "Oh, be careful with vitamin D because it can be toxic." Well, toxicity from vitamin D is extremely rare, I have to tell. It usually only happens if you take massive doses of vitamin D on a daily basis, and if you don't take it with vitamin K2. This hypercalcemia effect of high dose vitamin D is rare as hen's teeth. And in a recent conference with vitamin D experts, they really confirmed that you don't see it. Doses 5-10,000 units, which are much higher than the RDA for vitamin D, which is still 400 units. The experts are saying we should be taking 5,000 units, if not 10,000 units a day with vitamin K2, because it's at that level you get this layered benefit of vitamin D including protection against cancers when your level is above 120 nanomoles per liter. It's very relevant to the whole breast health story as well. So the COVID, yes, it's protective against. It seems to offer protection against COVID, other viral infections, boosts immunity. But on top of that, cancer protective when you get your level up to a certain level. Now, why we're not? I mean, for me, vitamin D is one of the most critical molecules, and we cannot afford to be deficient or insufficient in it. And it is not tested commonly by GPs and doctors. And I think everybody should know their vitamin D level. It's very important to know. It's very important to get your level to that point where it's giving you that, all of the protection you can get from it. It's such a simple thing to do and has no downsides.
Yes, no, indeed. And you sell these supplements, right, on your website as well?
We have a vitamin D complex formula, which we've had a lot of success with in terms of, because of the balance of the right dose of D, the K2 with it, and some other important nutrients to, for better aging, health preservation, which are commonly deficient. So, these formula were put together primarily for breast health, but more for general health, not just in women, but men as well.
What are the most dangerous health myths that you see people still believing today, even in 2025? I mean, there's a lot of these Instagram influencers and medical experts and TikTok superstars that are pushing all sorts of information. I mean, what have you seen that, you've come across that you've said is, hold on a second, that's a bit worrying?
There are probably too many to mention, but you know what I think one of the biggest myths is out there that people is just believing everything that mainstream medicine tells you. Honestly, it's back to that doing your own research, because there are still people who just follow blindly what their doctors and what mainstream medicine tell them, and they won't vary from that. And I actually think that is a myth. I think it's dangerous. I think it behoves all of us to do our own research and become informed, because I don't think, and I think recent years have shown unfortunately for me, the whole COVID thing exposed medicine and exposed doctors for really not really standing firm on behalf of their patients. I saw that. It shocked me, quite honestly. And I think fundamentally, when most of us who train to be doctors signed up to the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm. What's happened to that? It's like it's become rare. First do no harm. It's the argument with mammography is, if we're doing more harm than good, we shouldn't be doing it. If we're using drugs that are doing more harm than good, or other medical interventions that are doing more harm than good, we shouldn't be doing them. And we as doctors owe it to our patients to protect them and to do the right thing on their behalf. And I just think we've reached a point where that doesn't happen anymore. And I think this just blind belief in mainstream medicine for me is a big problem.
And then again, if you see, why do you think that is? Have you ever been threatened by Big Pharma? Have they ever shut you down for anything? Or there's two sides to this. Number one is the doctors directly. If they're pioneering something that's going to take away,
Yeah.
assuming from their bottom line, which is a business,
Yeah.
they don't like.
Yeah.
And secondly, they do fund, especially in the States. I mean, they fund 70% of media networks, right? 70% of the network's ad revenue, as seen on PBD's Valuetainment and PBD podcast. They found out that 70% of all of the media channels' revenue comes from Big Pharma. Now, if Trump passes a legislation to say Big Pharma cannot advertise on media, and I think the US is one of two countries it's available in. What's going to happen? Now, obviously, there's going to be more industries created around that and more natural and health-driven ads or Or you could see big pharma pivoting and acquiring all these other natural health companies and getting around the regulations as they usually do. But
Yeah.
starting from a point, have you ever been threatened by big pharma or, legal action or them shutting you down on something that you've been saying?
No, I haven't. I've had I've had a couple of run-ins with other doctors who've reported me to either my regulatory authorities or even to the GMC on one occasion, and it was thrown out because the evidence that was presented was flaky, and I could justify my position. Not from pharma. It's a part of it is doing what I do. I don't go out there purposefully to ruffle feathers. It's not at the top of my list of things to do. I've got better things to do. I'm careful about messaging because I think that's very important. And I'm not saying all medicines are the wrong thing to do. Some medicines can be life saving, of course. But we've been led by the nose. Medicine has been led by the nose by the pharmaceutical industry to believe that there's a pharmaceutical solution for every disease. That clearly is not correct. And in many cases, we see evidence that it's not a solution at all. There are many cases of that. And I believe that if we want a solution for disease, we got to start detecting it earlier. We got to detect it upstream and then fix it without pharmaceuticals. Now, of course, that's pharmaceutical industry don't like that. You're right. You made a point there. Will they jump into the nutraceutical industry and try? Well, they may try and do that, and it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to do that. But and I think the if we're going to fix disease, we need to be fixing it upstream. And second, I actually think if we're talking about disease itself, once it's established, I even believe that we are not using efficient tools in the majority of cases. There are ways of improving disease once it's been established, or possibly even reversing it, if we change the way we think about, disease process. So, that maybe is another long topic, but 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 I think that this belief that pharma offers a solution for all diseases is clearly incorrect, and in most cases, it's inadequate.
So a lot of people are getting sick nowadays, especially the younger generations. What could they do in their daily life to help them live a healthier and longer life?
Simple. Number one, check your vitamin D level and make sure your vitamin D is optimized. And that means in UK units being above 120 nanomoles per liter. Okay, normal is 50 to 200. Above 120 is where you want to aim to be. That has so many benefits on a person's risk that as a one measure, everybody should do that. Okay, everybody should. And then the other things that I would add to that is we need to have more phytonutrients in our dietary, preferably from a good organic source if we can, or some kind of phytonutrient supplement, because these nutrients that are found in a broad range of fruit and vegetables aren't just nutrients; they are bioactive nutrients. And the more we study these, I used to do a lot of lecturing on this, so I'm coming back to it now. They are anti-inflammatory, reduce oxidative stress, improve cell communication. The list goes on and on that these phytonutrients seem to be critical for human cellular health. They improve detoxification, they reduce cancer risk, they reduce cardiovascular risk. So a lot of the things that we're succumbing to can be significantly reduced by making sure we have a lot of these plant nutrients in our diet. So that would be maybe equal or secondary to vitamin D. And I think if people, and then the third thing I would do, maybe if it's again, it's coming down to, I'm focusing more on the nutritional elements here, but if you measure the balance of omega-6 and omega-3s in Western populations, it's almost always too high, meaning they've got too much omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory, not enough omega-3. So this imbalance is not favorable for aging, for degenerative disease. Nobody measures this, but it's one of the measures that a lot of functional doctors will look at. And when you do, you find that Westerners, it's way out. This ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is way out, usually because there's too much omega-6 in the diet, too much animal food. And that's a pro-inflammatory state, which doesn't help anything. By changing that ratio, improving the omega-3 level in certainly dietary omega-3, so seeds, fatty fish, etc. You can lower your risk of a lot of things. You can reduce inflammation. You can lower your cardiovascular risk. Lots of studies on that. And you'll improve your aging process. So I think just from my own experience, especially in the realm of nutritional medicine, Vit D, phytonutrients, omega-3s, those three things, if people were proactive about them, they can change the risk of a lot of disease process.
No, that's brilliant. And in terms of omega-6, that's
Yes.
derived from what? Animal fats or
Yeah,
red
largely
meat?
from animal sources, and whereas omega-3 is obviously more from fish, fatty fish, yes, but also plant sources like chia seeds, flax seeds, for example. They're plants. Echium seed would be another one, not so well known. Those are the sort of sources of omega-3. Plant-based omega-3s have to be converted to long chains, whereas fish oil has the long chain omega-3s, doesn't need conversion. So fish oils are more potent. Plant-based sources have to be converted to the longer chain. So conversion is somewhere around 8 to 10%. So, but these balances are important. The key nutrients important. Iodine in breast and prostate health, 50% deficiency in Europeans, easy to fix. One drop of a liquid iodine daily will fix any deficiency. So, because these things aren't measured, generally speaking, nobody knows, and people are walking around with these deficiencies, vulnerabilities that they don't know about. And doctors, because they're testing too late, aren't testing in this area. So how do you know if you've got this deficiency or not? You don't, is the answer, unless you're seeing somebody who's functional minded.
Yes, I mean, Nigel, I mean, we could speak for ages, and the amount of insights you bring is valuable. I mean, there's lots of gems that have been dropped on this podcast. I want to finalize by asking you, if you were to give your last 30-second speech to the world, what would it be?
Do your own research, dig outside of what you're being told, and build up from those sources the elements of truth. And I think if you're prepared to do that, you'll be much better informed, and you'll be in a position to do something to live a long and healthful life.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. This is one of many podcasts that are going to come out. There's a few other things that I think we wanted to dig into, but we don't have enough time. They're
Sure.
topics in themselves, but we'll definitely have a part 2 and part 3. But thank you very much for your time, Nigel. It's been a pleasure having you.
Pleasure. Thank you for the invite, Anna. It's nice to talk to you.